welcome to First Congregational Church of Langsburg's online service. Thank you for joining us here in this digital space. I am Nikki, and I will be your host for today. Today is the second Sunday of Epiphany, the season of celebration of how God's light has come and shone in the darkness through the person of Jesus, revealing God's perfect, limitless love for all creation. As we explore, we have a few poems, prayers, readings for us along the way. Blessings on this journey.
Good morning. This is Terry. I'm reading your call to worship this morning with the help of Hemi. A call to worship. As pilgrim souls on whom your light has shone, let us leave judgment to your tender mercy and turn instead to you. Keep pressing on toward the steadfast heights, the mountain country of your holy presence. Let us drink from your swift river, our true ecstasy. Refresh us, Christ, and bring us to the brink of that deep well, where life itself is light, and goodness, more than we can dream or think, flows from your plenteousness, from your delight in all your works, and where your loving kindness shines through our day and comforts us at night like soft wings, safely overarching us, that we might put our utter trust in you and fret no more for passing wickedness. Psalm 36, retold by Malcolm Guite.
An Epiphany candle lighting. We light this first candle to remind us that Christ is the light of the world and was born as a human being to dispel the darkness of our hearts and minds. We light the second candle to remind us that Christ is God's love revealed perfectly, knowing no boundaries or limits, and calling us the beloved of God.
All right, have you ever been in the midst of a lively conversation with numerous people about something really interesting or entertaining to you, and it like totally sucked you in, and then you realized, oh, I've got a story to tell to add to this conversation, and you just couldn't wait for a pause in the conversation so you could throw your story in and see what kind of reactions you got? Well, that's kind of what happens today with a jump that we're going to have in passages of Scripture. Now remember that today is the second Sunday of Epiphany, and the liturgical year has cycles through 3 different years of readings before starting all over again. And these are very creatively labeled years A, B, and C. Yes, super creative, I know. Year C's narrative, which we're in, has this arc of Epiphany that has us in the Gospel of Luke and following his conversation about Jesus' revelation to the world as the Son of God. But the Gospel of John is like excitedly sitting in the wings of this conversation with a story to add to the mix. So we jump from the Gospel of Luke on over to the Gospel of John for week 2 of Epiphany today. And then we jump back next week and stay in Luke for the rest of the season. So that tells me that the writers of the liturgical calendar thought that this specific story from John was important enough to the Epiphany season to insert it right here and interrupt the entire flow of Luke's stories. So what story is that? Well, early in John's Gospel, in chapter 2, Jesus is invited to a wedding and performs his first miracle, transforming water into wine. This is a very well-known story. If you were to ask someone out on the street unfamiliar with the stories of Jesus to name one of his miracles, you'd probably hear this one and maybe the walking on water mentioned. So a few notes here. It is Jesus' first recorded miracle in this gospel, and no other gospel mentioned this miracle at all. So it's totally unique to John. That also follows the story of him calling his first disciples in chapter 1. So this ends up being the dramatic opening scene meant to capture our attention. And finally, this is the first of 7 miracles that John calls signs, written so that we may believe in the revelation of Jesus as the Son of God. So it's no wonder that the liturgical calendar writers included this in the mix. Now, Epiphany is a season about revelation, light, illumination, awakening, and understanding. And I find it so refreshing that we have an entire season dedicated to awakenings. So our faith does not become like this fossilized, static ideal in our heads, but instead keeps it a living journey of awakening and evolution of our hearts as we meet each new year with all of their new problems and possibilities that it holds. And I think that what this wine in the miracle is to draw our attention towards is this fact. So let's hear this passage read and explore a little bit on the other side.
John 2, 1 through 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called to the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Now, Dr. Diana Butler Bass, who is an author, speaker, preacher, and amazing commentary on religion and contemporary spirituality, said, "Epiphany is best expressed through paint and poetry and imprecise preaching. It is the delight of theologians of imagination and children playing in the snow." Now, as we explore this passage, it is best done in this attitude, treating John 2 as a playground, because John has a knack for having 2 conversations at once: the descriptors of the story and the symbolic meanings of these descriptors. And we need to involve our imaginations in order to encounter both of these at the same time. Now, Matthew and Luke have some kind of birth narrative that introduces us to the character of Jesus' mother, Mary. John does not, and chooses this story to introduce us to Mary. Now, fun fact, the book of John actually never names her, just keeps her Jesus' mother. But she is an important character in this narrative who actually bookends Jesus' ministry. She's present here in the first sign, and she is present at the foot of the cross during the crucifixion. Now, these 2 events have significance to the story. John uses her symbolically in his writings to emphasize her as a new Eve, mother of the new creation, birthing the new children of God. She initiates Jesus' ministry here and is meant to be seen as a flipped coin initiation of Eve. Now, remember in Genesis 3 that Eve offered forbidden fruit to Adam and he took it. And this was used to demean and abuse women for centuries, labeling them as like evil temptresses that initiated the fall of humanity into sin. But here, that narrative meets a redemptive turn in Mary, who initiates the second Adam, Christ, into his ministry. Now, she says the words, "They have no more wine." Not a mere observation, for John always has these 2 conversations happening at the same time, the topical and the symbolic. Now, the surface conversation and the theological conversation happen simultaneously here. So yes, the wine is out at a wedding. Now, this is a cultural travesty in the making, and it's set to bring shame upon a family in a community for generations to come. That's the topical conversation. But the wine is gone is also a prophetic illustration of the state of things, the state of their world, One of their cultural stories from the book of Isaiah, specifically chapter 24, verses 7 through 12, describes the state of the whole world that lived under the curse of death and dying as like this party that's run out of wine, and thus joy. Now, this lack of wine and joy under the curse of death and dying was seen as a result of the sin of the people turning away from God and those close to God's heart, the marginalized, and turning then to worship power. Now, they gave these powers names and personifications of different gods, but it's all called idolatry, the worship of power over and against the human lives that this power oppresses. Now, Adam and Eve was a story that illustrated this choice, the first man and woman. Here in John's Gospel, we have the man, as Pilate would label him, behold the man, during the trial scenes later on in the book. And the woman, as Jesus calls her, not disrespectfully as it might sound to our modern ears, woman, what does it have to do with me? But symbolically, the second woman, the second Eve, birthing a new creation, a new people of God through her action here. And the new servants of God are beckoned, do whatever he tells you. Now, at the crucifixion, she will be present, standing with the disciple John, who symbolically represents the people of God going forward. And the two are given charge and care for one another. Behold your son, behold your mother. And somehow this tragic moment and its resurrection redemption is illustrated with what happens next. All right, what would you do if you went to a wedding and visited the restroom, and after using the restroom went to wash your hands only to find out the water was turned off? Like, you turn the faucet, you hear the hissing, the spurting of pressure being released through the pipes, but then there's no water flow. You'd be pretty put off, wouldn't you? Like, why would you invite all these people to your special celebration without providing the most basic of necessities, like water, right? Now, if we read today's passage, we got to take note that there are 6 stone ceremonial water pots here. And Jesus' command to the servants to fill them means that they're sitting there empty. Why would you leave empty the washing pots that people would need to wash their hands before they eat? I don't know. Well, it's not only hygienic for these people, but religious code as well. It sure is like the prayer before the potluck at the Baptist church, asking God to transfigure the cheesy, starchy food into something healthy for your body. Same kind of thing going on there. Now remember that John is having 2 conversations, and we have addressed the topical here so far and come up with more questions than we have answers for. Why is there no water here? We don't understand why. And we're encountering some absurdities, like that just doesn't make any sense that they do that. But when we sink below the surface into what this symbolically means for each miracle in John is a sign of something greater, we find something interesting. The water pots are religious, and they are empty. Now, what in the world is John trying to say here? Now, when human religion is uncovered as just another broken system, like a political or economic one, that keeps enslaving a majority to establish powers within it for a few, it reveals that they are empty of life, empty of any kind of life-giving water. So specifically, John is talking about how the first century temple system organized themselves around the worship of power with their dreams of ousting the Romans to set themselves up as the new kingpin in the area. This is mentioned in the previous chapter when Jesus encounters Nathanael and tells him that he sees him under the fig tree. Much to Nathanael's surprise, you are the Son of God. An old saying that actually meant that he was dreaming of sitting on his own land free and unthreatened. So the fact that there are 6 water jars is also worthy of notice. The 6 water jars indicate that human religious systems require a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. The 6 is the number symbolic of imperfect and incomplete humanity, while 7 is the number of divine perfection. And lastly, these 6 jars are filled to the brim, which indicates that they have run their course. No more life can fit into this abusive religious system. It's time for a new way of being, not one filled with bland religious waters of moralistic and abusive hierarchies of power, but one filled with the new wine of the new creation, energized by God's very Spirit within human hearts. And this is why the very next thing Jesus does is go and clear the temple out of all the abusive money changers in there. Now, I recently visited a few colleagues in the ministry for a meeting, and when pastors get together, there's sure to be coffee present. Now, I enjoy a good cup of coffee. In fact, a friend of mine owns a coffee house and roasts his own coffee beans, so I buy my coffee from him. The coffee offered to me at this meeting was not that at all. It was church coffee, which is bulk bargain coffee in a vacuum sealed can brewed on a Bunn coffee machine and left on a hot plate for 4 hours. So if you think about it, it's burnt coffee beans that have been burnt on a hot plate. So it's like twice burned coffee, which is really gross. We all agreed that the company was good, but the coffee was bad. And when I returned to the office, I brewed myself a good cup of coffee. And I didn't finish my bad cup of coffee either. Now, something similar is happening here in this passage, but in reverse and with wine and not coffee. Now, during a first century wedding, it was like this big multi-day feast event for the whole town. The entire town was invited there. The best and choicest wine is served first and then gradually lowers in quality as the people's senses become dulled because they're drunk. Not much unlike a bartender watering down the beers towards the end of the party to control people's hangover headaches later on in the next morning. Now, this master of ceremonies, who's kind of like the modern day weddings bartender, caterer, and DJ all combined into one role, is shocked that someone held the good stuff back. They brought him the wine or the water out of the pots and had him drink it. It had transfigured to the best wine. Now, he's probably a little bit concerned on how this is going to reflect on his job as well. Now, remember that this is the opening scene of the drama of John's narrative, setting the stage for what Jesus is aiming for. He called his disciples to him in the previous chapter, and this sign here is his message to them about where this is all headed. So we must remember that the lack of wine at this wedding is a symbolic representation of the state of humanity under the curse of death, as described in Isaiah 24. But the transfiguration of water into wine is an indication of the fulfillment of a new creation described in Isaiah 25, verses 6 through 10, which is actually later quoted in Revelation 21. And in this passage, the arrival of the Messiah is an arrival of a feast of joy with the choicest of wines. And we're supposed to notice that while Moses turned water of the Nile into blood, indicating judgment, the new creation turns water into wine, indicating life and joy. Jesus is adjusting their vision from looking upon gaining and exercising power as a means to their freedom, toward the eradication of death as a means to their freedom. Now, why would he redirect their attention this way? Now, worshiping idols of power is a fear of death. We all naturally desire the agency of organizing the events of our own life as we see fit. There is a certain dignity in this that is freeing to the human heart. But when it turns into grappling of sovereignty, which then amasses resources behind barricaded doors of fear, it keeps love at bay and often steals needed resources from the marginalized. Now, Epiphany is a season about revelation, about light, illumination, awakening, and understanding. So our faith does not become this fossilized, static ideal in our heads imposed upon the lives of others from our thrones of amassed sovereignty. Our faith is a living journey of awakening as we meet the new year's problems and possibilities. As John will say later in an epistle, perfect love drives out all fear. So if we have nothing left to fear, not even death, then we're free to live and love as Jesus taught us to. And the unfolding journey of our own life becomes a journey of epiphanies and awakenings of love active in the world and our own heart. And then we see the kingdom of God unfolding before us.
For those who have far to travel, a blessing for Epiphany. If you could see the journey whole, you might never undertake it. Might never dare the first step that propels you from the place you have known toward the place you know not. Call it one of the mercies of the road, that we see it only by stages, as it opens before us, as it comes into our keeping, step by single step. There is nothing for it but to go, and by our going take the vows the pilgrim takes, to be faithful to the next step, to rely on more than the map, to heed the signposts of intuition and dream, to follow the star that only you will recognize, to keep an open eye for the wonders that attend the path, to press on, beyond distractions, beyond fatigue, beyond what would tempt you from the way. There are vows that only you will know, the secret promises for your particular path, and the new ones you will need to make when the road is revealed by turns you could not have foreseen. Keep them, break them, make them again. Each promise becomes part of the path. Each choice creates the road that will take you to the place where at last you will kneel to offer the gift most needed, the gift that only you can give before turning to go home by another way. By Jan Richardson.
Thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope this service has been a blessing to you. What now? 1. Participate. If you would like to participate in our services, we would welcome your readings with a simple phone recording. And 2. If you would like to give financially to ensure the continuation of this online service, there is a link at the bottom of your screen. And 3, subscribe. You may subscribe on YouTube or like our page on Facebook to stay updated with our online services. We hope you have found some hope, help, and healing today. Have a great week and see you next Sunday.
Okay, here we go. Cars are passing by. Lots of cars. Cold hands. They're getting cold. Runny nose. Okay. Oh, my jaw. Getting cold.